Absolutely, yeah. So we have Dr. Leigh Jones here today, ready to speak to us about everything to do with COVID-19. When it comes to the nutrition side of things too, we're going to delve in a little bit more to do with that, because obviously a lot of people that are jumping onto the presentation today are much more focused on the nutrition side of things as well, of course. But we're gonna sort of blend a little bit of, you know, what the situation from an immunology background is. So just so to give us a bit of a background boost in that knowledge there, and how that ties in with the nutrition side of things as well. What we do know, what we don't know, what's sort of hearsay and just rubbish, and what's, you know, phenomenal information that's actually genuinely useful and based on facts. So to begin with, if you could introduce yourself and obviously your background and et cetera, that would be fantastic, just so that everybody knows exactly who you are, what your qualifications are, what your you know, experience is, what work you're involved with right now, just so that straight away people can go, brilliant, got it, like, you know, we know exactly who we're talking to is a world-class expert on this topic, and we should be listening.
Sure thing. So yeah, thanks for having me on, Shane. Obviously we've known each other a couple of years now, but first time we've done one of these together, so it's great to be on. Yeah, I'm Leigh Jones. I've got a PhD in infectious immunology, which I got at the University of Strathclyde way back in 2008 when I was living in Scotland. I worked in research mainly focused on immunology and infectious disease, continued in Scotland for 3 years, moved to Southeast Asia in 2010, continued working in immunology and infectious disease in Singapore. And when I talk about infectious diseases, this has covered a lot of things from parasites like Toxoplasma gondii, which some of you may or may not have heard of before. It's what Tommy died of in Train Spotting, if that makes things a bit easier. I worked on gutworms. I worked a little bit on viruses as well. So obviously we're going to talk about one particular virus today. I've done some work on influenza. I've also done some work on dengue. And then in 2017, I made the move from Singapore across to Vietnam, a very different country and a very different background. Most of my work now is focused on training. So I head up the PhD programme at the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit, which is based at the Hospital for Tropical Disease in Ho Chi Minh City. It's a huge tertiary hospital for the south of Vietnam, so lots and lots of patients. I also work across the region, so not just Vietnam, I work in Indonesia, Thailand, Nepal, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. Hope I've not missed anyone out. I've also done some training across in Africa last year as well. So doing a lot of interesting things. Also involved in a modelling group who are discussing interventions for COVID-19, for community-based interventions, which might help the government make decisions on what travel restrictions or community restrictions to put in place or lift. Obviously, where I am right now, the situation is a lot brighter. I don't know if many of you know a lot about Vietnam and its current fight with COVID-19. We only have just over 300 cases in Vietnam, which is a country of almost 100 million people. We've had 0 deaths so far. So it's been a hugely positive fight here so far. We're obviously still keeping very aware. And we're now out of sort of restrictions, and we had a short lockdown similar to many people across the world. We're now going back to a new normality. I'm now back in the office 2 or 3 days a week. Restaurants and bars have reopened, public transport's reopened, although international flights are currently grounded. So that's the situation where I'm at. Obviously things are very different in the UK and the US, and I appreciate that people are concerned. So yeah, I'm basically here to answer any questions, to have a good chat with you, Shane, and maybe answer some questions that pop up in the group chat.
Absolutely, fantastic. So on that note, everybody that's online right now, if you just feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, and what we'll do, we'll go through those towards the end of the presentation. and obviously we can go through and answer those accordingly. So feel free to obviously just drop those as and when. If there's any topics that come up, you have a bit of a light bulb moment and you need a little bit more information on a particular topic, you need us to elaborate on anything, then fantastic. We'll do that towards the end. Decent, good stuff. Okay, so first and foremost, I just want to thank you for coming and doing this presentation. Hopefully, everybody from that nice and succinct intro there understands that we've got somebody that is a genuine expert on this particular topic. When it's not just somebody who's like a celebrity that has lots and lots of followers and that's their thing, that's why they've been invited on. We just simply don't do that. The fact of the matter is we need to have a scientific basis to give advice on topics like this, because it's an incredibly in-depth scientific topic. So therefore we need experts within the area of science to be able to give advice on these topics. So first and foremost, thanks ever so much for setting the time aside. I know you're involved with a lot of projects right now. It's really, really good to have you here. So obviously it's going to go out and help lots and lots of different people. So we'll start off with a couple of key topics, if that's okay. So just to begin with, could you just give like a really, really succinct and in layman's terms, if you like, for people like me that aren't immunologists, that aren't massively well versed with the science, when it comes to COVID-19, what is the thing that makes it so different to everything else? Because you have so many people that are saying things like, for example, we have the flu, everybody has the flu every year, and people die from the flu all the time. What's so big about this? What's the big difference between that and COVID-19, and that which makes it a global pandemic where countries have to essentially go into lockdown and things like that as a result?
Yeah, so there's a few interesting things about COVID-19. First and foremost, it's new. So none of us have seen it before, which means that science is trying to play catch up a little bit. So obviously there's a lot of research going around the world trying to figure out how this virus, infects the body, what it's doing when it's in there, what symptoms it's causing, who's most at risk, how it's spreading, what drugs might help, and is there going to be a vaccine? So obviously there's this research happening all the time. But the fundamental reason, or the fundamental reasons why this virus has been so difficult to deal with is that, number one, it's more infectious than flu. So we talk about this, they call it an R0 value, which I'm sure more and more people are hearing these scientific terms and
definitely, especially in the news.
What they mean. So R0 basically means how many people can be infected from one infected person. So with the flu, the R0 value is about 1.3. It's very hard to calculate the R0 value at the start of a pandemic where we don't understand the virus and we're already playing catch up and testing for it. But we think it could be anywhere between 2 and 6, which is the R0 of coronavirus. And that will vary depending on country to country because of interventions. So the minute you change things and maybe put people into lockdown or, stop big events, for example, this R0 will change. It's a fluid number, it's not solid. The other thing being that it looks like the case fatality rate, so the people that you expect to die being infected with coronavirus is higher than flu. Now, it could be anything from 5 times higher to 20 times higher. We're not quite sure. And the more people that are tested worldwide, and the more we understand the number of people that are infected generally, we'll get a better idea. But it's looking like a higher mortality rate than flu. The other problem, or the other thing that's really difficult with this coronavirus, with SARS-CoV-2 versus SARS, which was probably a virus that more people understood in Asia because it was a bigger problem here that the UK and the West didn't really see it in the same way. With SARS, it was most infectious, or you were most infectious at the point that you had symptoms. So it's very easy then to identify people, to quarantine them, to separate and isolate them, to stop them infecting other people. The problem with COVID-19 is that people are most infectious before they show symptoms. So it's very, very difficult then to isolate people.
Yeah.
Then if you add into that about 30%-ish, now again, these are really varying figures because we're learning more all the time, are completely asymptomatic, meaning that you don't even know you're sick. So you could be visiting people and passing the virus on and you don't even know. So that's a problem.
That's a huge problem.
And also, yeah, it's a huge problem. So it makes it very, very difficult. And that's why it's spread so quickly. The fact that it's spread mainly in respiratory droplets also tends to make a virus spread more readily, and also from contaminated surfaces. So the virus will stick around for a little while on different surfaces, which is why it's very important to wash your hands a lot and try not to touch your face. So all of these things together make it very difficult. And even the people that do have symptoms, the variety of symptoms that people are having are very non-specific. They could be indicative of a number of different illnesses. So the doctors are also playing catch up as well. So you put all that together and it's kind of a perfect storm for this virus to travel far and wide, which sadly it has.
Yeah, it's crazy, really. Especially even on the news recently, I noticed that they've been updating the symptoms as well. So even as we progress through the pandemic, even the symptoms and how to identify it are constantly changing too. So, exactly. as you say, I think it's like again, I know absolutely nothing about this, but just from what I've seen from the news, it's a constantly fluctuating thing. Even when it comes to the R values, for example, yeah. It's dependent on lots of different variables. It's not just a set thing where you go, oh, this, infects 3 people. Well, it might infect 3 people today. It might be different more tomorrow. It might be less tomorrow. And and again, it's a difficult, I think because there's so many variables at play, it's actually quite a difficult concept for people to grasp, especially just, the general public in general that are going about their day-to-day busy lives. And they just want a quick snapshot. It's like, what's this about? Is it important? And it's actually, you can't just snapshot it. You can't.
No, you can. And that's where communications are so important. So science doesn't have all the answers right now. What science can give you is what the current status is and what the risk factors are. So it is about measuring risk and probabilities. And it is understandable that people would rather have a yes or no answer, a really binary, simple set of advice to live by. And there are some basics that will absolutely hold true. What's problematic is when there's maybe a new discovery that comes out, and these are happening all the time, and they're being released on what we call preprints from scientists, which is brilliant. It's a great thing. It means that we don't need to go completely through the peer review process before other scientists can read it. That's great for science and it's great for the scientific community. What it's not great for is when that then leaks into the mainstream media and people take it for granted. Now, it's really important for us to have that point of reviewing this information that comes out, peer reviewing, having your, broader colleagues in the community check through for mistakes and questions so that when it's fully published, we understand where the limitations are. At preprint, that doesn't happen. So it's fine for scientists to sort of look at it and say, okay, maybe this and maybe that. The difficulty is, say, a media release going out where things then become a binary yes, no. Yeah. And that's where the problem lies. And that's what we have to be very careful of at the moment.
I totally agree. And people need to just understand and take not understand in its entirety, because obviously it's a complicated subject in itself. But when it comes to research, let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say Lucozade or something was like a brand new thing, right? And let's say some research came out funded by Lucozade about Lucozade. Fantastic. We've got some research that says Lucozade improves, I don't know, aerobic or endurance performance, let's say. Fantastic. We can't use one snapshot, one piece of evidence, which, don't get me wrong, it might be a fantastically robust study. I'm not saying that just because of its funding doesn't mean it's not an inherently good study, but we need multiple sources of information. We need to collate that information in one space and then analyze the results of all of those pieces of studies. And even then still might not be able to have a concrete conclusion. And that's life. It's frustrating, but it's
the power of scientific consensus. And it's the best thing about science, because it's not just about one person saying, look, this study has been done and it works. It's about everybody else helping to say, okay, but here are the limitations, and I'm actually going to go and repeat that now, and then say, okay, the data holds true, or the data kind of held true, but maybe not in this population of people. And that's the power of science. It's about consensus. So the other problem is then when somebody comes out as, you know, and it can often be another scientist. So for example, the video that went viral on YouTube is a very good example of this, where you have a scientist who has a very good background and is now coming out and talking about this pandemic. And it's one scientist against the vast amount of scientific consensus. Now, to me, that says, well, the likelihood is that this scientist, particularly given that they're not an expert in that area, is probably jumping out of their lane and looking to publicise themselves for a different reason.
Yeah.
Gain notoriety for some sort of reason, rather than they're a freedom fighter that's been silenced. And sadly, that narrative is used by conspiracy theorists, and that's why we're now getting situations where one or two doctors or one or two scientists that are coming out and saying the complete opposite from the field. More often than not, that's a warning sign, not a sign that this person has been unfairly treated. Yeah. Not saying that doesn't happen, I'm saying that's incredibly rare.
Without a doubt. And again, it's really important to understand people's motives in situations like this. In an ideal world, we'd just have loads and loads of scientists all over the world. Every scientist has the exact same, or within reason, the exact same motive, which is to have an unbiased, undoctored view of what the science dictates to us, which therefore goes on to inform our opinion on the matter. Whereas what we have is extremist people that let's say, for example, they'll, as you say, a preprint, so an emerging piece of research comes out. Literally, BBC News will latch onto that and think, "Oh my God, we can include some incredible buzzwords with that," and that article goes viral. So for the motive for the BBC or anybody, not just them, but anybody, they just need viewers on their website or people to buy their paper or to watch their program or whatever it is. That's their motive. It's not to share unbiased, good quality, succinct overviews of the research and where it's at right now, what we do know, what we don't know. And again, this is what we do all the time within the area of nutrition with our clients across the world anyway, which is, our opinion is irrelevant completely. And all we hear is we're just the messenger. Here's what the research says. This is where we're at. And this is what we can say. This is what we can't say. We need a bit more information on this. And whether you're frustrated about that or not, or whether it's clear or unclear is again irrelevant, because that's where the information lies right now.
Exactly.
So it's really important, like you say, just to take a look at all the different motives that people have. So we have it, for example, so my research is within the area of veganism and weight loss and its effects on body composition and hunger and satiety, things like that. Even within that sort of very, very, very scoped field, you still have professors of universities that are actually, lo and behold, vegans themselves, and they are very, very, very closely knit, as in it's close to home, their heart when it comes to that particular topic. Therefore, they want to over-endorse it, and that's a problem. It might actually spread the good news about a vegan diet and all the things, but maybe they would leave out the stuff that actually it can cause potential. And
I think in particular in nutrition, it's particularly interesting because there seems to be there's so many tribes out there that are like, we are the vegan tribe and we are the keto tribe and we're the paleo tribe and now the carnivore tribe, and it becomes very, very difficult to then sift through what is belief and bluster versus what actually has some evidence underneath it. So sadly, this happens in all fields.
Exactly.
Nutrition is a particularly difficult one to navigate for most people.
I think it's because nutritionist isn't a protected term. So you get let's say, no, you don't have Lynn in accounts giving you her thoughts on, keyhole brain surgery or something. It's just that's for the experts. We wouldn't have the foggiest idea, but because nutrition is, it's something that everybody takes part in all day, every day. And also it's not protected, then, everybody sort of has an opinion, and it's a great thing for that reason that everybody's involved with it. But it's also actually a bit of a kryptonite thing because, because everybody's involved in it, what's the real good quality information and where do we get that source of information to? So, okay, so what would you be able to do? So what we're going to do is transition into the nutrition aspects very shortly. Just before we do that, do you mind just giving a little bit of information on you know, how we're combating this pandemic, especially within the UK, if that's okay. So when it comes to things like herd immunity, again, like I don't really understand what herd immunity is fully, and I'm sure lots and lots of people that are live now and also listening to the recording, that they'll be sort of scratching their head a bit and trying to understand what that even is, because, you know, we get the UK Prime Minister that's just been bombarded with criticism about herd immunity, and the thing is, I don't know what it is in its entirety. So could you give a little bit more clarity about that, and also what the other strategies are, not just herd immunity, and why some things could be good, some things could be bad? What's the premise of those things, if that makes sense?
So herd immunity is something that if another armchair immunologist tries to explain to me what it is, I might go crazy. So herd immunity is when you have a certain number of people in a community that have seen a disease and are able to defend their body against it from a second round. And the minute you start getting a certain level of herd immunity, the virus doesn't survive as well in the community, basically, because it's got less people to infect. And even though some people might not have seen it, they might not get a chance to see it because that level of herd immunity gives them some sort of collateral protection. Herd immunity is something that should never be a goal of an infectious disease, particularly one that has a death rate like this one. It should be, I mean, it could potentially be a nice side effect if we do things right, but we can't hang our hat on it. Herd immunity is something we look at when we're vaccinating a community, because when we vaccinate a community, they're not getting the disease, so the risk isn't there, right? So the risk is very low.
Can I just interrupt there?
Yeah.
Just so, because it's really important that we understand this. So when it comes to vaccinating, as in there is a vaccine present. So when you're essentially injected with a vaccine, you're not actually getting like the whole virus. You know, could you just explain a little bit more about that, just so that we?
Sure. So when we vaccinate, or when we design vaccines, there's a few different ways that we design vaccines. The very old vaccines used to vaccinate, and they were far more risky. And we're talking a long, long time ago. Yeah. They used to vaccinate with a virus that was largely live, but maybe had been damaged in some way, and we call this attenuated, which means that you give the body a little bit of it, but there's not enough virus there to cause real harm. But the risk of that is still far higher, because there's a chance, even if you damage a virus, that it could convert back to a more dangerous form. Yeah. So that's been one reason why we move away from attenuated viruses. There's very, very good ones with very high safety record, which is great. But the two vaccines that are sort of head-to-head at the moment, the ones that are showing the most promise, are the one from Oxford that people have been reading about in the UK papers, and another one in the US. And they actually are both on the same type of engineering. So instead of giving you a virus or a damaged virus, what they give you is the viral genetic material. So it's kind of like giving your body a blueprint, right? So it's not like they're giving you the whole thing, they give you a blueprint. But it's a blueprint for a very tiny part of the virus. And it's the part of the virus that's on the outside coating, the part that your immune system would see. Yeah. Okay, so you're kind of giving your body a heads up and saying, well, this is what it looks like. You make it yourself. And then your body will basically create this tiny little piece of the virus, which can't do you any harm at all, because you can't get the full virus. You've only got a small part. And then it allows your body to train its immune system. So kind of like if you had an army, for example, and you were taking them on training before you put them into a war zone. So in training, you're teaching them how to fight, how to find the enemy, how to destroy the enemy. That's basically what you're doing with a vaccine. You're training your body so that when the battle happens, they're ready and armed. Yeah. Right? You wouldn't send an army into battle without any ammunition. Yeah, of course. Giving your body a vaccine is basically giving your body ammunition and training. So it's really important. So that's the difference between a vaccine and an infection. So when you give your body a vaccine, you're creating a level of herd immunity, right, in the community. Now, there'll always be a few people in the community that cannot be vaccinated for whatever reason. These are often people that are immunosuppressed, for example, so they cannot create a strong immune response. So giving them the vaccine, they would do nothing anyway. So they rely on a certain level of herd immunity to give them collateral protection against a virus, right? So that's what you want to do with vaccines. You don't want to do that with a live virus, because to create that level of herd immunity, you're then accepting that a hell of a lot of people are going to get infected. Therefore, a hell of a lot of people are going to die, right? And at the stage of dealing with a virus where we don't know enough about it, we know that the elderly are more badly affected. We're now learning about a lot of comorbidities that might be affected, but there's now strange syndromes coming up in children. I personally know of young, healthy individuals who have got incredibly sick with it, who are at death's door. You know, we've got healthcare workers dying, we've got bus drivers dying. So in order to say, okay, we're going to go down the herd immunity route, you're effectively accepting that and saying it's okay.
Yeah, I totally get that.
That's what we fundamentally cannot do. And then even if you did accept that and you got a certain level of herd immunity, we do not know how long this immune response stays around. So for example, things like the common cold, immunity to any particular strain of the common cold may stick around for 6 months, a year, 2 years. SARS and MERS, which are the most closely related to this particular coronavirus, is around maybe 2 years, a year to 2 years. So then what? You say it's acceptable to have all these people to die, and then in 2 years' time it will happen again?
Yeah.
If we don't get a vaccine, you know? So the whole herd immunity strategy is fundamentally flawed, and I've not spoken to a single immunologist who thinks that's a good idea.
Yeah, this is the thing. So, you know, there's so many different terms and strategies that are being identified, especially within the media, that, you know, I'm just thinking about the general population, not the experts, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And we're just seeing like all these different stories and herd immunity and this, that, and the other, and you know, what we can do to basically flatten that curve, which we'll hopefully go on to very shortly. And we need to understand what all this is about in detail, but in a very easy to understand manner, which I think, by the way, you've done absolutely perfectly there. Like, even I understand everything way better now. So massive virtual high five for you on that side of things. But the thing is, you know, it's just so frustrating, because this presentation now, again, I'm biased, of course. I'd love this to go everywhere, but the fact of the matter is, this is the type of explanation that needs to be shared everywhere. But the problem is, like we said earlier on, when it comes to different angles that people have. So if you're, let's say, a professor at a university, and maybe you're actually wanting notoriety and you know, to have your name on different scientific papers, and that's your goal, not just to share on where the scientific literature is at any given time, then, you know, we have to be very wary of people's motives. So we need people like you to be basically giving much more information like this.
And what I would like to say before we move on is that generally the scientific community, they're pretty, I mean, you don't get into science to make money. Absolutely not. I'll tell you that right now. You don't get a lot of millionaire scientists. It just doesn't happen.
No.
So generally speaking, the scientific community are in it for the love of new knowledge and for genuinely trying to help, particularly those that are at the very translational end of creating vaccines or therapeutics or anything that helps patients, which is what we do at Oak Crew in Vietnam. All of the research is clinical research, meaning it's happening on patients to improve healthcare. So most scientists want to do this. What I would always say to people if they're not sure is, some scientists, and a big red flag would be something like somebody selling a diet book, for example, or somebody selling supplements, or, you know, somebody who happens to be friends with Andrew Wakefield and has been in the latest Vaxxed documentary. These are the sorts of things you need to look out for. But generally speaking, most scientists want to do good. The biggest problem I find is getting the message out. So scientific communications, and thank you for the compliment, I'm glad you found it understandable. Scientific communications is difficult because you're breaking down complex topics to try and make them understandable. Sometimes scientists are better at it than others, right? It's a very difficult skill. And then what you need is to also have that message going from the front line of science through to media releases, through to the public, and making sure that message stays clear. If anything goes wrong at that point, that's where you have difficulty. Then throw in on top of that politicians who obviously are coming with their own agenda, Donald Trump's a perfect example with the hydroxychloroquine drug treatment that he's been pushing. The minute somebody with a platform is talking about something that they're really not qualified in, things can get very warped. Yeah. And you need to be very careful of that. I think that's a big problem.
Just to let you know, we've actually had a question on that as well, so we'll go through that in a bit more detail sure. Towards the end in the Q&A section, if that's all right. So yeah. When it comes to the, when we say like the whole priority right now, really in general, is to flatten that curve. So yeah. if what does that mean in sure. your words, and also why are we doing this?
Okay, so when we talk about flattening the curve, so what happens when a new infectious disease pops into a population is that the way that infectious disease works is it'll infect 2 people, then 4 people, then 8 people, and then, so it grows in what we call an exponential way, yeah. right? So that's why you're seeing this really steep curve that people are drawing and saying, if we do nothing, this is what will happen, right? The reason we want to flatten that in the number 1 is because the minute you have a lot of cases, you are overcoming your healthcare and healthcare systems capabilities. So hospitals only have a certain number of beds. We only have a certain number of ventilators. We only have a certain number of nurses and doctors and all of these things. And that is set at a level that a population dictates depending on what their general state of health is like, what the age of the population is like, etc. Now, if we did nothing, very, very quickly, hospitals would run out of beds, and you would get doctors and nurses getting sick, we would run out of them, there wouldn't be enough ventilators, you get far more people dying, and not just of the disease itself, but all the collateral damage that goes with it. Because there could be people dying at home of heart attacks because they can't get to hospital, so we really need to flatten that. When we flatten a curve, we also are allowing our whole country to play catch up in a lot of other things. So it could be making sure we've got enough testing capacity, for example. It also allows science to catch up a bit and say, okay, let's start doing trials for different drugs. Let's develop a vaccine. Let's make sure that we have social distancing in place. Let's do all of these things. So it buys us all time, and it also reduces deaths overall. Yeah. So, and that's because our healthcare system is not overcome.
Yeah, because like you say there, it's really interesting when you talk about the actual healthcare professionals themselves and the clinicians. So when it comes, if you have one nurse that's treating 100 people every day, let's say, I don't know the figures obviously, but just for diagram purposes, if they become ill themselves, then those 100 people, whether it's COVID related or not, cannot be treated as effectively. Therefore, you get more cases and casualties in areas that are non-COVID related, but directly as a result of COVID, if that makes sense. So it has a knock-on effect to lots of different areas, so which is really, really interesting too. So one of the things as well, if we could just, like, between us, sort of clarify the word, because I think it's probably one of the most important words. When we say exponential, I think that people don't fully understand what that word means. Again, I am not for 1 minute trying to criticize anybody or anything, but we have to really understand what that means. So if you had a graph and it was sort of linear and it just, as in it went up in a line in a predictable fashion, so that would mean that, let's say, 2 people become affected, then 4, then 6, then 8, then 10. So you could predict very easily. So in another 2 days, another 4 people will be infected. In another so-and-so days, we can predict that an X, Y, Z amount. So it's very easy to predict that. Whereas I suppose one of the analogies that I heard a couple of weeks ago was a bit like let's say a forest fire in Australia. So if you had a little campfire and you threw a cigarette into your bush or something in your back garden. So if one bush is on fire right now, whereas if you leave it an hour, that could actually infect 3 trees. And then if you leave it another hour, that might infect 9 trees. So it's each one of those 3 trees affects 3 trees each. And now you have 9 people, or 9 trees, sorry, and so on and so forth. It's exponential, as in it doesn't go in a linear fashion. It goes really steep in that curve. Would you say that that's a really good way of putting it?
I think that's a fantastic analogy. So is a doubling effect. It's not an additive effect. So that's why it tends to, instead of like you see a linear growth, you're actually seeing something that goes like this. So that's why when you're looking at graphs a lot of the time now, there'll be, and I can actually share a really nice explanation of this, remind me after the video. It's a really short 5-minute video of trying to understand what graphs mean in COVID-19 in terms of like numbers and deaths, and what a logarithmic graph is versus a linear graph, which is designed specifically for that reason. So a lot of the time we're seeing logarithmic graphs, and it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, but it's going up in the same distance. So the numbers get squashed the higher up you go, but it's to enable us to be able to see the full picture when things are growing that quickly. But like I said, I'll share that link. It explains it beautifully. And I know that people are getting bombarded with graphs right now, and I think it really breaks it down well, but I can remind me, I'll share that.
Yeah, definitely. What we'll do is, if there's any bits and pieces like that and links, we'll have a catch up afterwards and just collate a few, even if it's 2 or 3 different key things. And I think your fact checking friends are definitely going to be one of those for sure, but we'll get onto that. Okay, so when it comes to immunity in general, so if we just park COVID-19, obviously we're having this interview now because of COVID-19, of course. It's a massive topical issue across the whole globe. Now, what if we just park that for a minute, and just, if you could help us to understand what immunity is, what your immune system is, and what, then we'll sort of transition into what we can do to manipulate the immune system, if that's possible, in a robust and significant way. If it isn't, that needs to be addressed too, which is probably quite important. But so if we start off with the immunity side of things first, in a really easy to understand manner, what is immunity? Like, what does that mean, and how do we, you know, boost our immune system if we can? And we'll move on through those topics.
Okay, so the immune response generally is the defense system that you have in your body. So it's a really, really complex system with multiple different cell types, signaling to each other in multiple different ways. So it's like a huge network of reactions. So it's not one linear thing. It's very, very complex. And I used to laugh that most medical students, their most hated subject in medical school is immunology, because it's a really complicated system. But if, again, I can go back to the army analogy. So you imagine in your army, you have multiple different people having multiple roles and doing different things. Some of them are more strategic, some are more communicating, some are dealing with repair. You've got your medics, for example. Some are your number one snipers on the front line. We have them in the immune system as well. So there's some really useful analogies in that system. So the immune system, generally speaking, can be broken down in a few different ways. So number one is your physical barriers. So things like your skin, things like the mucus in your gut, the mucus in your lungs, your airways. These are all what we call the sort of barriers to infection. So your skin's the number one, right? So people that have really bad burns tend to get really bad infections because that physical barrier is not there, right? So that's the number one. The number two is what we call the innate immune system. Now, this immune system is your first responders in an infection. So they tend to be the first ones to find any intruder, because that's basically what an infection is an intruder in your body, and your body's saying, hang on, you don't belong here. What are we going to do about it? And that's what the immune system is doing. And then they deal with it. So your innate immune cells are, and I'll throw some names out, don't expect anyone to remember them, but things like macrophages, dendritic cells, neutrophils, all of these are like your frontline troops. They aren't particularly well trained, but they get there first. They're not particularly sure, and typical that upstairs starts drilling. That's fantastic. Hopefully you can still hear me. Welcome to Vietnam. Hopefully it will be fine, because they've been doing it intermittently. So they're the first ones to get there. They don't always know exactly who the enemy is, but they know it's an enemy, right? So they tend to use very non-specific weapons to try and deal with it, right? Yeah. While they're doing that, they're also information gathering. They're saying, okay, we don't know what this is, but we'll take some information and we'll take it back to cells of what we call the adaptive immune system. So the adaptive immune system are your B and T cells in the main, right? Your B cells are the ones that produce antibody. Your T cells are fantastic at telling everybody else what to do. So they're kind of like the sergeant majors.
Yeah.
They also send messages to tell everyone where to go and what to do. Not only that, they can look at the message from the other frontline cells and say, okay, I know what this invader is. So now we're going to use far more targeted ways to kill it, right? Not only that, they remember what that invader is, so that if you see it again, they respond quicker, which is immunity, right? Yeah. So your immune system has a memory. That's why if you got COVID-19, in 3 months' time, you're not going to get it again, because your immune system are going to recognize it. It's not even going to get a chance to set up camp.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how the immune system works. But then after it's done the dirty job of killing things, and sadly you also get collateral damage from that, in the same way as in a war, right? You're not always going to just kill the enemy. You're going to cause some damage to, or friendly fire if you like, to the rest of your body. So that's the other side of it, because it's very much a double-edged sword, the immune system. And we know when things go wrong with the immune system, you get autoimmune diseases. So it's not always good to boost your immune response. You tell someone with celiac disease or with arthritis or something like this that they want to boost their immune response. I'm sure they will answer you in pretty colourful terms, because they want to do the opposite, is to dampen their immune response. And then after you have the fight happening, there's all this mess that needs cleaned up. So your immune response is also involved in damage repair, right? So you're going to have a lot of inflammation to get rid of a nasty, whether it's a bacteria or a virus or a parasite, and the damage to your surrounding cells is also mopped up by cells of your immune system. So it's a really complicated system that, generally speaking, does a fantastic job. If it goes wrong, it causes a lot of problems. So you can see that as a system overall, it works in a very fine balance. So anything that you're going to throw on top of that to try and mess with it can cause a lot of problems as well.
So that's such a good explanation. It's just so simple and step by step for such a complicated process, which is so. This is, again, I just want to like have a little disclaimer here. I obviously don't want to call anybody out or anything like that. I think it's a bit of time wasted when we could have been, just giving people solutions on this. So, no names or anything like that. But you and I have had a catch up. Was it about a week ago, roughly?
Yeah. And
we have guys in where you are right now, and they're selling, is it turmeric pills or something like that? And it's honestly, it's just so we have a process like this that is so incredibly complex and in depth. And some guy at the end of the road seems to think that a little pill like this, done. That's it. It's done. It's completed. It's staggering.
And that's the other problematic thing, because we're dealing with what happens in a whole body. So you've got all of these interactions in so many different cells and different in different tissues and in different organs doing these jobs. And then someone comes along and says, but if I take out this one particular cell and I put it in a dish and I put something on top, it does this. Therefore, if I put that into your body, it's going to do the same thing. And you're like, no,
they're quite different things.
It's so simplistic and so reductive. And the minute you're overly reductive with the immune system, and this is where the problem comes in with people selling supplements like turmeric or, whatever it may be, but turmeric's a good example, that they are saying, but because of A, and then you have all these slippery slope fallacies of
extrapolations.
This means D. And all of a sudden, if I give you a turmeric pill, no idea the dose, no idea what happens when we throw it on top of everything else. Yeah, that's going to work.
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So just a little asterisk for everybody that's wondering about different supplements and things like that. And again, the other thing is we also have to simultaneously, even though we've just said that, stay open-minded, because we may very well get some science that says some certain vitamin or mineral or trace element or whatever it might be, that if we supplement with these things, it might actually genuinely have an impact. So we can't just say ignore all information about that, but at the same time, right now we have to assess where the the playing field is right now when it comes to science, what information we have and what information we don't have, and give the advice accordingly. Okay, so let's say, for example, when it comes to nutrition specifically, how can we modify or improve or further strengthen, or for choice of better, I hate using popular words, but how can we boost your immune system in nutrition terms? If you can, if you can't, where we're at with that.
Okay. I'd just like to start by saying there is no single food or supplement that boosts your immune response. It really is as simple as that. If anyone's trying to sell you otherwise, they are lying. It does not exist. There are things that we can do to keep our immune system healthy, but it's not through a reductive approach. It's not about, okay, I'm now going to have 3 cups of green tea a day, or I am now going to have lemon in my water, or any of these things that you might read. It really is about looking at the most important themes in your nutrition. It's about looking at the woods, not the trees, is what I'm saying. So have a look broadly at your diet. What we do know about diet and immunity are really the basics. Number 1, eat a diet rich in fruit and vegetables, which goes against all of the carnivore crazies, but basically, again, scientific consensus and the best nutritional research so far, we do need a diet rich in vegetables, in particular in fruit, because of the amount of vitamins, minerals, etc. that they provide, which is important for your immune system. And also, they also have fibre, which is very important. So this is why having individual pills are not really very useful, because they work a lot together. Having the whole food is just so much better. But it doesn't mean that X vegetable is better than Y vegetable. Look at it broadly. Try and, if you're not someone that eats a lot of vegetables, try and find some that you like. Try and introduce some more to your diet. Try and embrace colour as a good general thing to think about, because it just means you're getting variety. The other thing that fruits and vegetables do is to lower what we call your sort of chronic levels of inflammation. Now, again, I'm not talking about people that have actual disorders. That's very, very different, and they have their own dietary requirements. I mean, someone that has, no underlying conditions and just generally wants to have as robust a constitution as possible, of which immunity is a big part of that. It's very important because it lowers what we call your levels of chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is when you have very low-lying level, but all the time, of inflammation. And that can be caused by poor diet, that can be caused by stress, by lack of sleep. Things like this all contribute. So it's not a one thing does this, one thing does this. Together, you need to look at everything together in your lifestyle and your diet and your exercise and your sleep, your hydration. All of these things together are very, very important. So that's why it's better to look at more general rules. So yes, diet rich in fruit and vegetables. Fibre is very, very important. Fibre obviously is very good for your digestive system. One of the biggest immune organs in your body is your gut. So you have a lot of immune cells in there, and there's a huge amount of crosstalk, as we know, that goes on between the bacteria in your stomach, and your intestines, sorry, not your stomach, in your intestines, and your immune response and everything else that happens in your body. Now, at this stage, what I am going to say is I'm not going to start talking about probiotics, because the science behind them is, for want of a better word, shit. So what I mean is that if you have a nice varied diet with lots of, fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds, fibre-rich items, then what it encourages is what we call diversity of your bacteria, right? Yeah. Which means you've got lots of different species. And that we know correlates with health. Yeah. There's not one specific bacteria that we can say that definitely is this, or this definitely is that. And what we know about is generally there's a pattern there that healthy people have that you probably want to contribute to by your diet.
Absolutely, and I think it's worth noting when it comes to gut health. Again, we have to understand nutrition in general terms is a very, very incredibly in-depth and complex thing. It's not just like what you eat, and that's it. So one thing I was just gonna say earlier, a point that you made. when we try and like reduce it down to simple terms, we don't get any information at all. So if you say, let's say, oh, I'm going to have vitamin C supplements to boost my immune system because I don't want to get COVID-19. That's a very logical way of looking at things, but it isn't actually in fact true when it comes to the science, because let's say you had 10 micronutrients, let's say you had, 10 different vitamins or fiber or whatever it is, and let's say there was 10 outcomes. So if you have like, vitamin C is for immunity, calcium is for bone density, this is for that, this is for that, and that's as simple as it played. That would be fantastic advice. But the reality is vitamin C can actually have an impact on literally thousands of different outcomes, and that's one micronutrient. We have multiple micronutrients, multiple facets to your diet. Absolutely. So therefore you can't simplify it like that. So I'm on the same side as everybody when it comes to the general population, trying to find like, how can I put it, like the answer or whatever, I don't, what's the thing, the one thing I can do in my life to overhaul my immune system and replace it with a fantastic one? How do we do that? And when it comes to gut bacteria, again, I know people that have dedicated themselves for decades and decades to one strain of or let's say a handful of strains at least of different gut health related bacteria, let's say, and there's billions of them. Yeah. So we can't just have blanket statements. It's an incredibly complex thing.
Literally what we know in science, just to summarize what we know about probiotics or not probiotics, microbiota, gut bacteria, in one sentence is, we know it's important.
Yeah. And again,
pretty much that is it.
I saw some research recently was talking about, it's that important that obviously everybody's probably heard the term, like, your brain's the most complicated thing in the universe. Now, when it comes to your gut, it's that complicated that it's actually been referred to as the second brain within your body.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
So it actually works independently from your brain as well. So your brain's the control thing that dictates what happens in your body. Actually, the gut is doing that too. The research is emerging that dictates that too. So we just have to understand the complicated aspect, which is annoying because we don't have all the answers that you want, but it doesn't make it any less important. Just because it's frustrating and we don't have the answers doesn't mean that we have to go, oh, that's annoying, well, I'm just going to take vitamin C anyway. It's like, we can't just come to that conclusion.
That's the problem. We talked about it the other day when we were chatting, that speaking about nutrition and immunity, like we were talking about in broader terms, and saying, well, with broad strokes, this is what we can say, the details we don't know, etc. You can't market that, right? No. You can, and that's why you're having people that are running with science that's not actually there yet, because they don't really care. They don't really care what they're giving to you or, what it's actually going to do. As long as they market it with a nice sports star or Instagram star that's taking it and you're buying it, that's all they're interested in. It doesn't matter. And they have zero science to back it. And I would say that anyone who has seen, an immune boosting supplement or anything like this, the minute you ask them for research, and when I mean research, I mean an actual peer-reviewed paper, clinical trial of their product to show that it's doing what they say it's doing, I guarantee you they will come back with nothing except a blog, some YouTube videos, and saying there's a proprietary blend that we can't actually release, but it's been in-house research. That should all set alarm bells ringing. Focus on the things you do have control over. Don't buy something, buy a promise off someone based on shiny marketing. Yeah. Because that's all it is, it's shiny marketing. And so yes, there is no single immune supplement.
I totally agree. And this is the thing, just to bring some balance into that as well. I also understand people, and you do of course too, but we understand people's frustration when it comes to marketing. You, at the end of the day, there's very easy psychological tactics you can play, and different colors and sequences and words and things. You think, oh my God, it looks so bloody true. Like I'm a nutritionist and I see adverts and I'm thinking, even I want a KFC right now, and I didn't 5 minutes ago. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's that
Yeah,
sort
well,
of thing.
you've got specialists in advertising and marketing that are there just for that.
It's their job,
the one that I saw, and the minute they then put an opinion leader on it, so someone who's very popular, you know, whether it's a Kardashian or whether it's the most recent one is Tom Brady, who's now selling an immune boosting supplement. This is a, you know, multi-million dollars worth sports star, football star in the US, who's now using COVID-19 as leverage to make more money. This is what we should be calling out. That's not okay. And by the way, scientific Twitter have rounded on him chronically, so it's actually quite amusing. But these are the sorts of things that we need to be aware of as marketing magic pills, because they simply do not exist.
Okay, so I think that one of the best things from this point now is to go into a nice, concise summary of what we can do that is actually, as in practically speaking, what can we change going forward now in our day-to-day lives when it comes to nutrition specifically as a priority, obviously, but also the other components and facets that supplement or contribute, should we say, for a better word, towards boosting your immune system. And again, I'm so frustrated. I don't want to say that, but everybody just wants to know, how do you boost your immune system? Well, these are the simple step-by-steps of how to do that.
Right. Basically. So Dr. Jones's top immune boosting tips. So diet, like I said, rich in plant-based foods if you can. Try and increase your fruit and veg intake. Number 2, lots and lots of fiber. Keep the diversity going in your gut microbiota, your good bacteria in your gut, if you like. Number 3, when it comes to diet, and a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but sorry, it's true. Beware of your alcohol consumption. Alcohol is a double whammy. So if you are an excessive drinker, I'm saying excessive, please look at your own country's guidelines and consider your drinking. We do know, as part of the Mediterranean diet, a glass or 2 of red wine is actually quite beneficial, but most of us don't stop at 1 or 2. It screws around directly with your immune cells. It does depress your immune system, which is not good. Number 2, it also screws with the microbiota in your gut. So it's a double whammy for the immune system. So be careful of alcohol. So that's diet. And that is literally probably the broadest things we can take from diet. A good, balanced, diet full of fruit and veg, ease off alcohol, lots of fiber. Exercise. Exercise is absolutely fundamental for a healthy immune system. So whether that means just increasing your activity levels, going for a walk. I think one of the good things to come out from the lockdown periods is that people are actually making use of the fact they're allowed to go out for a walk. So probably there will be people getting more steps rather than less. Some certainly have. Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see how human behaviours have changed, right? And human behaviour is something above immunity as well that's going to feed back and have an effect. So moderate exercises. If you are someone that loves going to the gym and really smashing it, remember you need to take rest days. Your body needs a chance to do its job, which is to repair those muscles. And what cells do that? Immune cells. So don't give them additional work while they're trying to do their jobs. Take rest days. Never ever train if you're sick. So again, your immune system is trying to do a job. Don't try and give it double work. Generally speaking, if it's just a sniffle and it's local, you maybe want to do something low impact at home. If you're absolutely desperate that you want to do something, maybe you want to go for a walk, don't go to the gym. If it's systemic, meaning you have a fever and you're head achy, listen to your body and lie down. Don't give yourself too much to do, and no one will thank you for going to the gym and spreading your germs anywhere anyway. And I know in the UK gyms are closed at the moment, so this isn't an issue, but this is talking about generally moving forward. Yeah. The next thing is sleep. Obviously try and get enough sleep. Try and make your bedroom a sleeping haven to make your sleeping better. Don't have a TV in there if you can avoid it, or at the very least make sure you've got downtime from screens and these things. All they do is keep your brain active, and it makes it a struggle to. I'm
so bad for that. I must admit.
I am too. I'm horrendous, and it's really bad for your mental health as well. Because some of the last things I might do is have an argument about immune boosting, put the phone down, try to get to sleep, have a nightmare about it, wake up the next day stressed, which I'm going to come on to as well, is probably one of the worst things. for your immune system. So obviously the other thing, hydration. Hydration is important for your whole body. Also, water makes up the majority of those mucus secretions we talked about, which is your first line of defense. So you want to have those, you know, in your gut and in your lungs to try and protect initially when those bugs are trying to invade. So plenty of water, and your immune system needs it for all the chemical reactions that are going on in there as well. So keep an eye on hydration. Stress. Stress is terrible for your immune system. So when you're stressed, you have all of these hormones kicking around, and your hormones speak to your immune response and dampen things down. Something you probably want to avoid, and like I mentioned before, the chronic inflammation that we talked about, that's what happens when you have stress. And I know lots of people are generally stressed right now and anxious. Levels of anxiety have gone through the roof because of the current pandemic. I can share some resources on that as well. So please
Amazing.
Remind me after this. But there's a really good one. I can't remember who it was from, but I originally saw it from the Open University, that talks about recognizing your anxiety and saying, is it something I can do something about? Is it something I can't do something about? And a sort of problem-solving tree on how to deal with those levels of anxiety. If it's work stress and you're feeling overwhelmed, I don't know, speak to your boss, think about delegating tasks, time project management, these sorts of things. Revisit all of the things I said before, diet, exercise and sleep, and try to make time to unwind. If you are putting yourself under pressure to do more work because you are working at home, which we're all doing because we think, well, I'm at home, so it means I'm slacking and I'm not doing enough work, and then that makes you stressed. Do try and find time to unwind, you know, whether it's watching Netflix or cooking or reading or whatever relaxes you. Try and disconnect from social media. It's not particularly good for your stress levels right now. And try and stay connected to people if you are at home isolated. You know, Zoom, more and more people are using things like this. Stay connected, even if it's for a chat or a virtual pub quiz or any of these things. So that's a bit of a sort of whistle-stop tour of,
course.
Sort of 5 main things: diet, exercise, stress, hydration and sleep.
Amazing. And you don't know how much I appreciate that being summarized in an easy, because whilst we've got the science over here that's ridiculously complex, like you cannot understand how complex it is, we also have people that we speak to every day. I know, but what's the answer? So we've got to just like come together in the middle somewhere, maybe actually not even in the middle, like way more towards the end user, and just say, okay, you know, let's say if you cover, even if you, I wouldn't even know how you'd quantify it, but let's say 75-80% of the stuff would come under those 5 areas as an umbrella. Fantastic, happy days. So I think that's going to be massively useful.
Don't go buy pills.
By the way, we've got a link that we want everybody to follow at the end of this.
Yes, by my immune boosting minerals. Yeah.
Joking, of course. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go into the Q&A session, if that's okay. I'm conscious that...
Don't worry, I've set aside time. I don't mind running over, so don't worry about it.
That's fine.
Anyway, you know.
That's cool. I'm also thinking of people that are wanting to catch up on the recording. I would absolutely love beyond belief to just do a 6-hour special on this, but I'm well aware of people's, what people have got on right now, and I'm just maybe if we just go through in a succinct fashion with the Q&A session, just so that we can go through
as short as possible.
That'd be amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, let's scroll to the top here. We've got some incredible questions coming in here. A lot of them are Chris. Happy days.
That's in there. No, that actually his questions will probably be quite useful for me.
Yeah, I'm sure, because this is the thing, Chris will be asking stuff that's on behalf of what everybody needs to know anyway, which is a great thing. So, okay, so there'll be some exciting updates on the vaccine from Oxford University. Can you give a qualified update on this, as there is so much controversial data online just now about vaccines?
Sure. So we've got, like I mentioned, 2 good front runners, one in the US and one at Oxford in the UK. These are they're going through clinical trials at the moment. Early days, it's still very early days, so let's not get too hyped. But what we know so far is that the people that have been vaccinated have very strong antibody responses against the spike protein of the virus, which was the little portion that I was telling you about earlier, which is part of the viral coating, which is suggestive that they may be immune to the virus. Now, I'm using non-exact terms because we don't know for sure yet, but early days looks good.
And again, so it's really important, you know, so if some magazine got hold of that, they would go, coronavirus on the way to being cured. Like,
Exactly.
they probably would just say cured.
Yeah.
So just really, you know, this is why we've got you here today, because we need to have all this clarified. So what's your opinion on the UK's approach? As recently Boris has loosened things up and there have been a sharp rise in the R value again.
Yeah, I think we can't put too much focus on the R value because, as I mentioned before, the R naught value varies so much depending on so many interventions and different things. I think what we need to be aware of is any sharp increases in cases. I don't want to get too political. My major issue with the UK's response is it was far, far too slow.
Yeah.
We watched while China, Italy, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, all were battling this and did nothing to prepare, which then means when it does hit, you've got less options on how to fight the thing, which is why you have to go into extreme social distancing, lockdown, etc., so that the government can play catch up, make sure they've got contact tracing in place, testing in place, and enough beds. So that's currently where the UK is at. Do I think it's too early for them to reopen? Probably, but to be honest, every country needs to reopen sometime, and we've got to hope that the preparation that's gone into what's been happening during the lockdown has been appropriate, and they have prepared themselves for the next wave so that you are getting a far lower number of deaths, because to be quite honest, the death rate in the UK right now is shocking from this virus.
Even proportionally speaking as well. So there might be a bigger total in other countries because they got a bigger population. There might be smaller totals in other countries, that have a smaller population. But again, if you do it proportionally, it's actually pretty...
Shane, you don't even need to look proportionally. So the top two countries in terms of raw numbers of deaths, not percentages by populations. The US is number one, huge country. Number two is the UK.
It's absolutely staggering.
Right.
And
so you don't even need to look at percentages as a country. That's
a double whammy.
Yeah.
So again, I suppose it ties in nicely when we were talking about, you know, your speed to react to the situation is important, because when we were talking about that little bushfire earlier on, you know, if you act within the next hour, then you can just literally put a cup of tea on the cigarette and it's done.
Fantastic analogy.
If you wait 5 hours, you've got like 5 new levels of it being spread at an exponential rate. You literally have a whole bloody country on fire now, or whatever. So anyway, okay, let's have a look. Okay, so that was from me saying thank you. Keep the questions coming in. Yvonne's got a question. I think he has been listening to his advisors. However, I also think that keeping people in lockdown for so long might not be a good thing. We all know that you can build up resistance to bugs when you are around them. I fear that some people, rightly or wrongly, have not been out the door since day one. So are they going to be at more risk when they do go out? What does Leigh think about this? Etc.
So in terms of COVID-19, we don't want you to see the bug. Basically, we don't want you to see it, because as we said before, that the risks attached to this bug are too risky to try the herd immunity approach. Now, if you are shut down for 2 weeks, does that mean it's going to have an adverse effect on your immune system because you've not been seeing bugs? No, because you don't live in a bubble. We don't live in an airtight bubble in our houses. We're getting exposed to bacteria and bugs every single day from the food we eat, from the air we breathe, from our pets, from our children. You are not going to, and some of this actually came from, I think a lot of that sort of fear has come from a YouTube video by 2 doctors in the US, and that was widely debunked by a bunch of immunologists. You're not risking your own immune system by hiding at home, basically.
Okay. So when you say, so if I could just add another little angle from that. So when you say we don't want you to see this COVID-19, is that pre-vaccine or is that post-vaccine, if that makes sense?
Pre-vaccine.
Pre-vaccine. Okay. So as soon as the vaccine comes out, it's genuinely effective. And again, by the way, I know I'm trivializing things here, but when it comes to, you know, a vaccine becoming available, it's less apparent, would you say?
Yes, if a vaccine becomes available, and obviously I'm very aware that we can't lock down forever, and we might not have a vaccine. We might have a situation where we are going to have to rely on decent therapeutics and hope that our other control measures are going to be such that we can at least limit the damage that this virus is going to do while we wait for a vaccine. As an immunologist, I'm obviously very keen that vaccine is the way out, and I think Jeremy Farrar, the head of the Wellcome Trust, probably put it most succinctly in an article I read in The Guardian. The Wellcome Trust is one of the biggest funders of science in the UK and globally. They actually heavily fund our unit out here in Vietnam. And he said that the only exit strategy is science.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with him. And I know that's biased, but that is the only exit strategy that we can actually...
I would question if it's biased, because, you know, at the end of the day, if there's one outcome for a problem that's multifaceted like this, that's really, really in-depth from a scientific perspective, it is the way. It's not, you know, I know what you're saying, that, you know, you could say, well, our way is the only way. It's not as though you're saying our way is the only way without considering other options.
Yeah.
It's been considered, you know.
All of it.
But anyway, okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So Trish has asked a really, really interesting question. I think we briefly touched upon it in the presentation. So what is your opinion on taking vitamin D and C plus zinc for improved immunity? Also, I can never pronounce it, hydrochloroquine, whatever it is.
Hydrochloroquine, yeah.
I've seen it written down a million times, thinking I'm gonna have to learn how to even say that, as a potential simple treatment for COVID-19. So this is obviously in relation to Mr. Trump's advice to the world. So, fantastic.
Vitamin C and vitamin D. So there were some initial observational studies, and these aren't very well controlled trials. They're probably the simplest things that tend to happen at the, you know, on a very small scale, where they basically give some stuff to patients and see what happens. Now, they don't compare it to, well, what if we give patients something different that's a placebo, and does it do the same thing? Are they going to get better anyway? So it's not what we call a controlled trial, it's observational, and some case studies as well. So IV vitamin C was something that was done in small scale in China, and also vitamin D in some observational studies, again, across the region and some other places. Basically, the science is not sold on it, and that's with people who already have COVID-19, so as a curative. The vitamin D research is all over the place. Again, there was a brilliant blog piece that was written by an epidemiologist I know about vitamin D, and pulling it together on a blog, so I can share that as well. And that really explains why we can't really say anything about it so far. In terms of supplementation, it's not going to do you any harm, but to be perfectly honest, I think it's far better to look at your diet overall, because then you're addressing everything. You're addressing the fibre, you're addressing the diversity of, you know, your gut, you're addressing everything. And often taking these pills, the dosage isn't always correct as well. So I just think, again, looking at it in a very reductive fashion is not very useful as a preventative. So that's vitamin C and vitamin D. In terms of hydroxychloroquine, so hydroxychloroquine is a drug that is used initially for malaria and lupus. It's a drug that was reported a little bit at the start, again in small scale studies, to perhaps show a positive effect. Now, unfortunately, after that, Mr. Trump got hold of it and started blabbing on about how he thinks it's the next big cure-all. Since then, there's been a lot of randomized control trials gone into place with this drug. Some of them have been stopped already because of the side effects. Now, the problem with this drug is that it's particularly bad if you have any heart problems. So it can be very, very dangerous. It can cause a lot of issues with the heart. So it's not something to be taken lightly, and shouldn't be taken outside of medical advice for sure, and should only be happening at this stage within trials. So there are some of those trials still ongoing. We've actually got one in Vietnam as well. Our place are doing they're doing a chloroquine trial, because that's more readily available than hydroxychloroquine. The other trial that's interesting, and this has probably been what the recent discussion about Trump taking a pill of this a day, which is just incredibly stupid. But there's a prophylactic trial, meaning a preventative trial, that's going to start in a number of centres across the UK and Asia, where they'll be giving low dose to healthcare workers as a potential preventative. But again, the key thing here is it's within a trial, which means that ethically everything's been taken care of. People are being observed very closely. So it could very well be that something will come out of this. But to be honest, the trials so far, it's not looking promising for chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine.
Fantastic. That makes much better sense. And again, there seems to be a running theme here as to, you know, it's actually quite a novel thing. It's new. So the amount of time that science has had in general to catch up, no matter what perspective that you're looking at it here, whether it's you know, from an immunological perspective, or whether it's from, you know, something like a pill or a potion or whatever it is, you know, we need time for things like this to be investigated robustly.
Absolutely. And we don't have time to design a new drug for this right now. So that's why all of these drugs you're hearing about have all been used for something else, because it's far quicker to get a drug and repurpose it for a different ailment, a different illness, because you don't need to go right back to square one and go to all the safety trials and drug design and animal studies. It's far simpler and quicker, and that's what we need at the moment. We need something that's going to be quicker to get through to helping patients at the end of the day. So that's why all of these have been, well, this was actually an HIV drug, and this was actually an influenza drug, and this is a malaria drug. And so you're going to hear a lot of that. And there's trials, like there's hundreds of trials going on across the world with different drugs. So hopefully we get something coming out that at the very least is going to limit the amount of people going through to the most severe form of COVID-19, which is what is killing people.
Brilliant. Okay, so Chris has asked, due to the lack of testing going on and a poor response in general in the UK from the government, would you say that the actual infected and death rates are much higher than reported? As it's common to see online the usual, it's blown out of proportion and the deaths aren't that high type comments.
Okay, so if you look globally, so if you look at the UK, and that's the problem, everyone looks at their own country, right, in isolation, and we're not looking at things in isolation. This is a global issue, right? Yeah. So if we look at the UK, are they under-reporting or over-reporting death rates? Now, you've got people arguing both sides, because there's this strange sort of conspiracy that doctors are actually getting paid to put COVID-19 on death certificates, which is crazy.
I've heard so much about that.
That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Now, putting COVID-19 on a death certificate in the UK comes from two things. It comes from testing and saying this patient definitely had COVID-19, and it is likely. Now, that person could have also had, you know, something else. It still means it should be on the death certificate, because if this person was, you know, had a chronic disease, but all of a sudden got super sick and died, then the chances are, if they've got COVID-19, that may have had a role to play. Now, it may not be the number one role to play. It may be that they have liver cirrhosis, or they have stage 2 lung cancer, or all of these different things, but it should at least be on there as a mention. Without doubt. Right? I mean, unless somebody's been hit by a car and you're putting COVID-19 down in the death certificate, that's not what's happening. And I think of the percentage that may be sneaking through that actually it wasn't the cause of death is going to be tiny compared to the amount of people that may be dying in nursing homes, or, you know, are dying at home. And so there's the greater chance in the UK is that they're actually being underestimated rather than overestimated. Now, that's looking at the UK in isolation. Yeah. If you don't agree with the UK's figures, fine, look somewhere else. Yeah. So if you look broadly around the world, there are literally, I think, so I checked the numbers yesterday. So for anyone that wants to follow the numbers, what I would advise is that you go into John Hopkins School in the US. They have this really interesting dashboard way of presenting it. So we've got almost 5 million infected and a case fatality rate of around 6 or 7%, which is about 320,000 worldwide. So that's a lot of people, you know. So if you don't believe the UK's figures, why not look somewhere else? We're all having problems with it. So this isn't being blown out of proportion. Yeah. It's probably the most upsetting thing for particularly healthcare workers, of which I'm not one, hearing these things and thinking, I'm going into work every day and I'm seeing someone say goodbye to their mother dying on Zoom because they can't come in and say their goodbyes, you know, and then you're going home and hearing someone that's, you know, self-isolating and is doing an office job or whatever, throwing their mouth open about something that they really don't understand. And I think we need to give respect where it's due to people that are actually working on it. You can't be an expert from Googling for 5 minutes. You literally can't. It's an absolute minefield of shit out there. And often people just don't have the self-understanding and critiquing ability to separate that from stuff that's true. So just be aware and, you know, have a think about your knowledge base and be honest with it. And think about maybe speaking to people that might just know better than you. You wouldn't do, you know, your own mechanic's job in your car yourself. You would take it to a garage.
Yeah.
So think about speaking to someone that might know a bit better and not your friend on Facebook.
I totally agree. And again, I think because it's such a topical issue that affects billions of people across the world right now, and it affects everybody's lives in the same sense that nutrition every single day affects, and we're inherently involved with it every single day of the week. Therefore, everybody has an opinion on it. You know, we don't have an opinion on, I don't know, pediatric surgery or something like we said earlier on, because it's not something that's part of our lives every day. Whereas nutrition is, COVID-19 is, unfortunately, a part of everybody's life, whether you're, you know, been subject to the infection or just part of this general lockdown situation. Your day-to-day life's been affected. You know, people have opinions on things, which is great in the sense that it opens discussions. You know, people have a chat about things. What it's not great for is when we have, you know, Linda from the, like I said, you know, from the post office saying, have you heard about this blog that I read the other day? And it's like, look, I'm not, you know, the blog may be very, very good quality piece of scientific information, but we are almost certain without even reading the blog that it's probably not going to be, because what we know is that behind all of this, the scientific community doesn't have the robust recommendations available and to hand just yet. And those are guys that are literally, they have a salary for the last 25 years to investigate a millionth of this topic on their own, and they don't have that information. So it's incredible that you have this one blog post that summarizes everything.
And there's everything, you know.
So again, it's I don't want to get frustrated because I don't want to get my emotions involved. Science shouldn't really involve emotions, but it's so difficult given the current situation to see.
That's an interesting thing as well. So you said science shouldn't involve emotions, and that's absolutely true. But I think one of the fundamental problems traditionally with scientific communications always has been it's so cold. Like it's so factual and so inhumane, and people don't respond to it. So that's why scientific communication is really difficult.
Yeah, it's not sexy, is it, at all?
No, it's not. It's not sexy.
I agree.
And it's hard, and we are getting better at training new scientists, which is part of what I do as well, you know, training scientists how to communicate, which is really, really important. And you need to keep the human aspect, you know. So it's no use some professor standing there going, the R naught is this, and by day X we expect this number, and day Y. You want someone to also say, and by the way, you know, if you're in an ICU, this is what we're seeing. And be honest and tell the human side of the story as well, because this affects people. It's not just numbers on a board here that we're dealing with, you know, it's real people.
I totally agree.
So, you know, that is the difficulty of trying to balance scientific communication and trying to provide unbiased, you know, balanced information while also remembering that people are involved here.
Without a doubt.
It's not easy for a lot of scientists.
Definitely. It's a very tricky thing, you know. As I say, in theory, we should just have no emotions involved or anything like that. But like you say, at the end of the day, we're working with the public, real people. So I understand how emotionally charged it can be and how attached you can be to a certain blog post or piece of information. But regardless of how you feel, we have to base advice, recommendations, interventions on the scientific outcomes of quality testing. And not just like, oh, the science isn't catching up quick enough, so I'm going to do my own thing.
Scientists have been wrong before. Yes, that's a good thing.
Fantastic.
And guess who are wrong? Other scientists, not you after a 5-minute check on Google. You know, and that's why the scientific community and consensus is important, because it changes. It changes with new evidence. If it doesn't change with new evidence, then it's not evidence-based, it's belief-based, and that's when we get into trouble.
Without a doubt. Okay, so we have a final question. Are there any therapeutics that are close to being available to buy as the extra time, to buy us the extra time and possibly reopen the UK?
No. In a word, at the moment, no. I think I think a lot of clinicians are probably getting better at strategies of making sure that the people who are getting very sick are more supported so that they can recover. And I'm sure that will get better as well. So it's not just about drugs, it's about the procedures in hospitals and how do we best support patients, you know, in terms of oxygen, ECMO therapy, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
There's been a few drugs that are getting a lot more airtime than others. Everything is still early days. So, you know, we're going to get bombarded with results coming out of clinical trials because they're happening everywhere. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be a raft of drugs that may be better in some situations versus others, because that's the other thing. You're probably not going to get one drug. You probably need a number of drugs, because some drugs might not be good for, say, the elderly, or some drugs may not be good in certain populations, you know, for genetic reasons. So we really need to make sure that we've got a selection if possible. There's HIV drugs being trialled, there's influenza drugs being trialled, there's obviously hydroxychloroquine, which is not looking great. There was Gilead, which is getting, or remdesivir, which is another one that's been getting a lot of headlines, but to be honest, the initial results were mainly being released by the drug company itself. So obviously we're taking that with a little bit of a pinch of salt until we see better information. I think so far on that, we've had a trial that says it's rubbish, one that said it was okay, and another one that said it's showing promise. So again, when you're talking about that consensus, it doesn't look like a magic bullet. But there's a lot of other ones. There's immune therapies as well that are being trialled. The problem with patients that get very sick is because by that stage, it's not so much the virus that's the problem anymore. It's the fact that the immune response has gone into overdrive. And we talked earlier about collateral damage. So if you get this huge, what we call cytokine storm, which a lot of people have been hearing in the press, then that can cause its own problems. So by then the virus is almost an irrelevance. So we've got that issue as well to contend with. So it may be that some immune suppressive drugs may show, you know, some promise. I think they're looking at an anti-IL-6 inhibitor, which is an arthritic drug. You know, so there's a few different things. And if you go online and have a look, you know, at the list of clinical trials happening right now, it is huge. So we can only just hope that the results from them come through and that they're positive. Fantastic.
Okay, so I think that we need to give you a massive, massive thank you for your presentation today. The thing is, it's you know, on not just this particular specific topic. What we have is we have a challenge of finding, like you said earlier on, you know, when it comes to science people, they sometimes, not all the time, it's not representative of the whole scientific community, of course. We find it difficult to find people that can convey a message in a very easy to understand, and again, in layman's terms, what is the bloody answer? Do we have an answer? How do we put it simply? A very complex thing. How can we put it succinctly in an easy to understand, step-by-step thing where you go, got it? And I think you've done that absolutely perfectly on a topic which is just so topical and affecting billions of people's lives right now. So I can't thank you enough for setting this time aside. I know how important your work is, and how many, you know, obviously working through Oxford University and working with less funded, less well-developed countries across the world, and your advice and input there goes a huge, huge way. So you've got all that going off, and you've got little old me saying, can we pinch you for a minute and just take you away from that to help our guys? So we're going to share this far and wide as much as possible, and basically be respectful of your time, in the sense that we'll try and get this shared out to thousands of people, hopefully. And I really, really do appreciate your time. So is there anything else you'd like to add towards the end here? Any final thoughts? Jerry's final thoughts? Lee's final thoughts in any way?
Dr. Jones's final thoughts are try and critique your source when you get given information. So look at who's releasing it. Is it a blog? What's the quality? Is it a scientific study? Are there any motives behind what they're trying to say? Are they against the consensus of medical science? And if they are talking about studies, you know, are these clinical trials, or are these just, you know, comparing one country to another and then extrapolating to one variable? So I can also share after this, Shane, with my sort of step-by-step how to critique, which is a very basic thing of things to think about for any member of the general public when they're faced with so much information on a daily basis. So I think
That'd be amazing.
that's quite a decent guideline to sort of to help and share with the, you know, the Karens and the Kevins in your life who may be coming forward and telling you it's all a Bill Gates driven conspiracy.
Oh, God almighty. It's so funny, you know, just before we go, but, you know, like, you know, people are like, there's a movement going on here that we don't know about. And all the, you know, there's people behind all the countries that are coordinating this movement. It's like, do you know how difficult it is to coordinate 10 people to do the same task? And, you know, even in a business sense, like if you work for a local employer, do you know how difficult it is for your manager to coordinate you and 9 other people? So you're saying not just that, but hundreds of countries and also billions of people. Oh my God, it's just, anyway. So
but that's conspiracy. What I would say to people is do not engage with conspiracy theorists. If it's belief, there's no point. You can batter your head off a brick wall, but for your own mental health, don't go there. Address the people who actually are wanting to ask questions and get information, not those that are writing their own movie script.
Without a doubt. Dr. Jones, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate the time. And we've already had loads of comments flying in saying thank you as well in the chat section. So it's been well received by all, I think. So thank you. And we'll catch up again very soon and put some additional resources for everybody in the group to catch up on and so on and so forth. Massively appreciated. Take care.
All right. Cheers, Shane.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe and healthy. Bye.